Dag the Agus Falsha. Hi, hello, and welcome. It's John O'Sullivan from the Irish Pagan School. And I have a question. Well, it's kind of a two-parter question, but it leads very much into requesting an opinion on the use of Irish mythology in popular media. So delighted to have had this question, and I'm going to read it out. It came to us in our Patreon there from a Patreon from a patron going by the name of Envion. So Envion sent this message. I'll just read it out. So in Irish mythology and popular media, with a lot of books, movies, and video games drawing from Greek and Norse mythology, have you ever wished that people looked at Irish mythology more and actually got it represented in popular media, given that it has a rich source that is largely ignored? They do continue, though, and kind of a second part, how do you feel about them taking liberties with it in order to have it be more appealing to a wider audience? The context is, I asked this because I'm currently playing a game called King Arthur, Knight's Tale, and while it heavily draws from the Welsh mythology that is the King Arthur legend, it also is basically pan-Celtic, drawing not just from Welsh mythology, but also Irish and Scottish mythology as well. The Dagda, Tuatha Danann, and the She are all mentioned alongside Caradwin, and having the She divided into Seelie and Unseelie courts. This leaves me with mixed feelings because I'm happy to see more things use Celtic mythology, but at the same time, I get disgruntled at seeing all the Celtic nations just lumped into the same mythology and to be described with the ambiguous old faith. In the game, you have to choose between Christianity and the old faith, setting up that age-old conflict. When the Welsh, Scottish, and Irish cultures have their own distinct cultures. While there is some cross-pollination between Celtic nations, there are, as you have said many times, distinct unto themselves, to the point that I can sit here playing this game with the knowledge I have at this point and point out that's Welsh, that's Scottish, that's Irish. I'm also kind of jaded, in fact, that I see this in America all the time. Our Celtic festivals here just throw all 7 nations together like they are like they're the same thing. And having delved into Irish, Welsh, and Scottish mythologies and cultures, we really do a disservice to all the nations by doing this. So with that long rant, what are your thoughts? Well, first, thank you very, very much. My first thought is of gratitude. I really, really appreciate the message and that you reached out to us and that you thought we could provide perspective and answer some of this for you. But I'm also very, very grateful to you, because you're doing the work on it. You're doing the recognition and the awareness and beyond to be able to see the differences and acknowledge the value of those differences. Even though there are kind of cultural pressures to just homogenize or to kind of lump it all together. It is about unity. And I always talk about unity. But it is important to acknowledge the distinctiveness that each person brings to a collective, that each kind of nation or culture brings to a collective, which is why, like, America as a culture is multicultural and should be an expressive celebration of all of those different, unique, amazing cultures that unify or gel together to hopefully ideally become something amazing as a collective. Unfortunately, there are aspects where that doesn't happen and where some cultures get marginalized or, treated as a minority, and then you have ethnic or cultural harm being done, which is a different topic from your kind of query. But to kind of take it back to the first question, yeah, there has been a lot of kind of focus in the past on Norse and Greek mythology, Egyptian mythology, well, Greek and Roman mythology, because they were predominantly colonizers. Like, Rome colonized Greece. Greece initially wasn't just one nation. There was a whole collective, a whole variety of tribes, which were eventually unified into the one kind of the structural country of Greece. So there is these kind of stories, and the age of those stories have been maintained because though those many different tribes unified, they kept or maintained their cultural identity. So we can see like the initial wars of Persia into Greece Many if you want to go back to the historically, you have the Battle of Thermopylae, you have the stand of the Spartans. Sparta was a different nation state to the Athenians and Athens. So there were different kind of sections within, but they still unified, held their identity, and came together. Which is why their stories have kind of come down to us maintained in that way. Whereas Rome kind of went out, they unified within their country in Italy, but then they expanded into the Roman Empire. And their process to conquest and colonization was one of military kind of dominance, which meant that there was an aggressive kind of attempt to not so much acknowledge the cultures that existed where they were, but also in some ways not to fully eradicate them. Like there was some attempt toward acknowledging that, you can just be you, but you become part of the auxilia or the extended Roman Empire in the later dates of the Roman Empire, when they had expanded very far. But when we have the later colonization that occurred in the island of Britain, because there were multiple different tribes there as well that were all conquered and dominated to become one unified. And we had the creation of England, then Wales and Scotland. So there's these three different countries on this one island, which then unified to become Great Britain, even though they're an empire, British Empire. And that's when us, Ireland, next door neighbors, got, oh, well, we could just knock next door, send over there and stick a flag on it and call it the Great Empire. I'm slipping off topic. I'm falling into history. I apologize. But the history helps inform the cultural narrative. And that's probably what I'm striving at, because our media is created by our cultural narrative, by our understanding of our history, by our understanding of our mythology, and then how people interact with that is based on their understanding of the history. So if, for example, no one ever knew the historical significance of the famine in Ireland, the Gortamore of the 1844 to 1850s is the Great Famine. If there was no knowledge of that, if that was eradicated or written out of history, then you could just make all the potato jokes you want. And then there would be no context for the hurt or harm that would actually cause to a people. In the same way that you have Christianity coming in and colonizing Ireland, if we didn't have the older stories, if the old stories weren't maintained, we wouldn't know that there was previous belief, that there were indigenous spirituality of a very beautiful nature in the island, which was then aggressively, specifically targeted. And so it's in that shift of power. And this is what really I'm talking about. It is about power. Power helps define the narrative. So those with power define the narrative for those who don't have power. So suddenly you have the circumstance where the Irish mythology for Irish people as a diminished power position, because we're colonized by the nation of England, because we're colonized from a spiritual perspective by the Christian church, it devalues the content, it devalues our myth, it devalues our spirituality, it devalues our deities, to the point that they're seen as just remembered caricatures of old mythology and that they have no significance today. And the moment you begin to break those bonds, the moment you begin to break those down, then people begin to take liberties and people begin to do what they want. There was a conference that Laura was on a panel speaking about it, and was speaking about this specifically. It was the use of Irish spirituality and mythology in modern media. And one of the other panel members was pretty much blatantly said, well, Irish is a dead language anyway, and it's all just myth, so I'll do whatever the heck I want with it. To the gasps of dismay from both Laura and myself. Of course, Laura was, not gasping in dismay, more kind of plotting their imminent demise. But the moment you can devalue a culture to such a degree, or a nationality to such a degree, then anything associated with the beliefs, the practices of that culture suddenly become up for grabs from a modern media perspective. And that's why it's so important to hold on to the history of things, to recognize what is actually being done here. So in one way, I can see how Irish mythology can just be taken out of context and just taken up for grabs. And two examples that come to mind is, of course, the Dragon Age. I'm a fan of the Dragon Age games. I enjoyed it. But when you get to meeting this particular character who you can bring in to join your troop, who you can eventually, through all the plots, woo into some form of romantic arrangement, and this character is called Morrigan, and all of the kind of main motifs of the Morrigan, the goddess, are placed upon this character, it gets very glaring, very galling very quickly. And that leads to misconstrued information, because some people don't have the history, don't have the context, don't have the awareness of the mythology. So all they get then is this twisted, corrupted perspective, which gives them information, which then gets misconstrued on top of what is a very real practicing deity for many Irish pagans. Same thing happened. There was, actually, I have three examples now. There was a game that I was really looking forward to, actually. You mentioned a game there, and there was a game, it was called Kingdoms of Amular Reckoning, and the game was written and created by some people I'm a big fan of. It was written by Ore Salvatore, who's a fantasy writer that I've read loads of his books, if not all, and I absolutely loved his writing style in the Forgotten Realms fantasy genre from Dungeons and Dragons. So I was very excited to kind of, experience a game written through his skill, and the artists involved and all the game planning involved. They had some really, really good names, and I was like, I'm excited for this. And I managed to get my hands on a pre-release demo copy, and I made the character, building up, getting it started, going through the early cutscenes, and it starts with you waking up on top of a pile of corpses because you're the one immortal in all of it. And it then talks about the Tuatha De Danann, and that you're actually one of the Tuatha De Danann, which is why you're immortal. But they didn't say Tuatha De Danann. It was pronounced Tuatha De Danann. And the moment that it said Tuatha, I quit the game. Okay, John, are you overreacting? It's only a word. It's only a pronunciation. But that is the tribe. That Tua is the tribe, and it's the tribe. The Tuatha De Danann is the tribe of Danan or Danu, which is the collective name of my gods. So I knew I could not sit through playing that game hearing Tuatha every few minutes, and I didn't play it. What was something I was really looking forward to, I then stopped. The third example, which I'll touch on in modern media again, there was a comic series started in 1983 called Slán or Slain, and it is a supposedly fantasy-based character written by the 2000 AD authors. And the reason this one came around to me is because when talking about the Fomorians, the ancient rivals to the Tuatha De Danann, someone was like, oh yeah, I heard they all come from under the sea and they're horrible, monstrous, grotesque fish people. And I was like, no, absolutely not. And then I remembered, the Slain comics and how Slain battles against the Fomorians, which are monsters invading from under the sea, horribly mutated fish people. And this person's understanding of the Fovra or the Fomorians was completely askew and completely corrupted because of the modern media representation, which was this comic. And again, it's because they were presented with imagery, presented with words, and didn't have any other context around it. When we look specifically at the Fomorians, they're beautiful. They're absolutely stunningly beautiful people. When we talk about the conception of Bress, for example, who became the king in Ireland after Nuada from the first Battle of Moytura, Bress is described as stunningly beautiful. And his father is described as stunningly beautiful because his father, Elatha, comes up out of the sea. Okay, there's the sea connection, to woo Bress's mother, Etnu. And she is completely smitten by him, and they couple, and she conceives a child. And then as he's getting ready to go, she's crying, and he's like, why are you crying? And he's like, well, I don't know you, and we're like, I don't know if I'm going to see you again. He's like, well, no, this is who I am. I am Elatha, and here's a ring. The child you conceive will be named Bress, and he will be beautiful, and he will be great. Again, when we look further later on in the myths, Lu, the Lu Lava, the Lu Longarm, the god who becomes again the king, who after Bress, after Nuada is restored, after Bress is deposed, Lu steps in, Lu the Ildonach, he of all the skills, to lead the Tuatha Dé Danann in the run up and through the battle for the second battle in Moytura. He's half Fomorian. His mom is Fomorian. His father is Keen, and she was kept away by her father, Balor, the Fomorian warlord, because it was a prophecy that said that his grandchild would kill him. And so he locked her away in a tower, and Keen ends up kind of getting in, and children are conceived, all of which are thrown into the sea. And Lu is the only one who survives. He's saved by Manan and Maglir from the sea, and then raised by Tailtiu. And so he does fulfill that prophecy, but Lu is beautiful. He's described as like this shining continent, this this sunny continent, i.e. he's so beautiful. Not that the literal sun shone out of his face, because he's not a sun god. Sorry, people, he is this beautiful kind of character, and this is the lore. This is the information that we have dating right the way back to the 9th centuries, based on language, throughout the medieval centuries, the early medieval, when all this was written down in the books like the Yellow Book of Leck, in the Book of Kells, the Great Book, the Book of the Dun Cow. Like, this is all the information that we have, but because of how modern media has just taken these words and presented them in a fictitious way to provide this appealing to a wider audience, this kind of, how do we, the Fomorians are the bad guys, so if they're the bad guys, we have to make them look monstrous because they're monstrous bad guys. Whereas, what is actually scary to us, what is actually monstrous to us, is humans. Because humans are the ones who do the most harm to humans. That's actually scary. But this is just fiction. This is just fantasy. We get to do whatever we want in fiction and fantasy because it's not real, right? No, there is a real impact here. There is a living cultural belief. There is a living spirituality around this, which is why you end up with circumstances where so many people get confused by the content. We talk about the Morrigan, this ancient Irish goddess of poetry, battle, prophecy, and badassery, to be honest. And someone then contacts us, she's a succubus, right? No. That comes from an entirely different, like, fictitious genre of, I think it's an anime program with the Morrigan. It's this, bat-winged, big booby kind of creature. Or when there's the mention of Lamia, so she's a vampire, right? A Lamian. No, that was an older word, a Latin word for demon, which was put into the texts. So there's so much that then is taken out of context, twisted and misconstrued, which then eventually becomes very, very damaging to people's approach to belief or approach to connection with our spirituality. Same thing happens with the Dagda. The Dagda has been represented in Marvel Comics, and he's this big blonde, large guy. At least they present him as a large guy instead of a muscled bound Adonis. By the way, Thor in Marvel is not Thor, because Thor in the mythology is a big muscly guy, absolutely, but he's more built for strength than he is for ripped abs and kind of bodybuilding. There's a difference between bodybuilding aesthetic and strength building aesthetic, and Thor is strength. And also he's a redhead. He's a scruffy bearded, scraggly haired, flame tempered horror of emotion is Thor. Not this smiling blonde blue-eyed thing as represented in Marvel. Again, there's a difference. It's understanding that one is fiction and one is actual spiritual belief. But the problem becomes when people try and connect with their spirituality and all they have are these faux simulacra, these fake kind of masks that are presented to them, meaning that they find it very difficult to actually declutter that, to deprogram that, to get down to what is, the root lore, the main information, and then the real spirituality of the whole process. Which is why we have classes in here going how to decolonize your spirituality, how to decolonize your druidry. All of that is breaking down the incorrect information that has been stacked on top of, what is a healthy living root underneath all of it, but it's just being clustered over by everyone else's bullshit over the last few years. And not healthy bullshit. If it was actual bullshit, then it would help the natural roots grow. This is like, corrupting invasive species stuff. So it's a tricky one though, because I was talking about this recently. I did a class on the ancient heroes and villains of Ulster quite recently, and I got into it with peoples in the Q&A afterwards, about how the Irish pagan school gets accused of gatekeeping. And it is so fundamentally at odds with what we do here that it is galling and it's hurtful, because I want people to connect with these stories. I fucking love it when I share this information, when I share this mythology. All I actually do is trying to, come here, sit down with me, like give me a bit of time, and I will tell you all of this kind of stuff about our mythology, about our culture, about our spiritual beliefs, about the origins of the Irish people, about how all of this still informs the very landscape of our island there today, how you could come on a tour to Ireland and stand on the hill of Tara, that place where Lou faced off against Oma, and Oma fucked a boulder through the wall of the banquet hall. I can stand you on that landscape. I can take you to the Cave of the Cats. We can go down into the darkness, which is the fit abode of the Morrigan. We can stand upon the Mound of Rathcroghan, and we can look out upon the fields where all of the armies of Ireland gathered for the Táin. This is real to us. Right where I am in Waterford, quick drive, I can bring you to the Barrow, which is named after the child of the Morrigan, who's, was going to become a corrupting plague everywhere. So his heart was taken out, burned, and the ashes were put into the river, and the river boiled. Dean kept the leech today, but the river literally boiled with the horror and kind of washed it all away. And that's why the river became called the Barrow. This is true for us. This is as real as the land in which I stand on. And then we have something like, I think it's what's a game called Smite, and it's kind of taking the Irish gods and putting them into this, fighting like game circumstance, and how you can take Cuchulainn, and then he has two forms because he can go into this warped, twisted form and stuff like that. And then you got Lou with his amazing magic spear, and it's like, okay, but all of this is taking away from what is real. And that's the core of it, because all this stuff is real to a lot of us. It's not make-believe. It's not fiction. There is a reality to all of it. Like I literally drove through Naas in Kildare yesterday. Naas being the town in Kildare, Naas being named after the wife of Lou, who had an indiscreet relationship with Kermit, the son of the Dagda, leading to Kermit being slain, leading to the Dagda going on his quest to pick up the staff or club, which would bring people back from the dead. It is real to many of us. So when we have this clash, I want as many people as possible to hear these stories. I really, really do. Like if I'm gatekeeping, I'm standing in the gate trying to keep it open to get as many of you fuckers in through the gate as I can, because there's a lot of really cool, really amazing, really powerful and inspiring mythology and history and cultural connection and spiritual connection to be found on the other side of that gateway. So I'm keeping the gate open to get as many people to sit down and to talk about the real stuff of this as much as possible. But if you come up to the gate and say that Cuchulainn is the Irish Superman to me, I'd be like, hold there for a minute while I just adjust your understanding and then get you through the gate, because he's not. If you come up to the gate and you're like, well, the Fomorians are all horrible fish monsters from under the sea, I'd be like, I don't mean to be this guy, but well, actually, they're not. Here's the information. Here's the lore. By the way, have you considered moving in through this gate to take a seat at the Irish Pagan School? We have so much fucking information that could, if you wanted to, change your entire understanding and perspective of all of this kind of stuff. So I feel you, Envion. I really, really do. I have had the exact same experiences that you have had when you're engaging in modern media and something just clashes and jars, and it's just no, it's just painful. It's just frustrating. So all I really do then is go back to my job, which is to teach the next class, do the next YouTube video, turn up on Patreon, answer the questions. Because that is where I can make my changes. And that's where things can hopefully change over time. So I want more people aware of our mythology and our history and our cultural narrative and the path of spirituality that comes from it. I really, really do. But I'm also conscious of the fact that there needs to be a good way of doing it that respects the origins of that culture and of that nation, so that we can do it in a healthy way that respects the roots of things and grows it in the right way, in the right connection. As we say, the core quiveness, the right connection or the true connection. Not saying that we're the only ones who offer that. Absolutely, there are multiple ways to connect with our spirituality, and we have multiple teachers in our school who do it. Not just the John and Laura show. That's a huge, big push for all of it. It is to raise the awareness of all of this for as many people as possible in Ireland, outside of Ireland, to kind of get aware, and so that they can, make a healthier and probably a simpler and easier connection to their spiritual past than they normally would. Because if you approach Lou thinking he's a half fish person, his first conversation with you is going to be sit the fuck down and figure your shit out before you come and talk to me. If you approach Odin thinking he's a great guy who absolutely loves, he's a lovely father figure, totally caring, he will take the fucking advantage of your simplicity or idiocy in that way. There are many different truths that are involved here, but it is about going as much as we can back to those sources, as much as we can to the indigenous origins, the cultural kind of voices of the native speakers to it as well. Which is why I'm delighted some people do contact us. Like, oh, I'm writing a book inspired by this. I don't want to get it wrong. Can you recommend? Can you kind of steer? And we'll try and help as best we can. We can't always kind of give a huge amount or as much time out of our time to do it. But for the sake of a conversation or an email from me, it could just help someone respect the roots of the media, or respect the roots and origins of the information, so that it doesn't become another corruption of modern media. And all we can do is just keep trying, keep striving. So you sent a long rant of a message, Envion, and I have given a long rant in response at this particular point, and the answer hopefully has been kind of clear, if not completely unclear. There is such a rich source to our mythology, and it is frustrating that it is ignored. But I think we have been through such a difficult time trying to rebuild our cultural identity after being colonized, after being taken advantage of, after losing so much of our time because of what was done to our nation. I'm kind of a little bit grateful that we're on the short list for picking and choosing by the global sphere to just take whatever they want out of our media, or out of our mythology, and then change it. Like there's like I can't remember the name of it now. There's a Japanese game where your character is a fighting game, and you go through and you have to fight through all of the different gods of all the different pantheons, and one of the worst ones to face apparently is Lu. So the name and some of the identity of that, like he's described as this, he's this flowing, like, spear wielding character in their game. So some of it has come across in how they've chosen to represent it, but it's still not ideal. It is still not ideal, and it means that anyone coming to the path of spirituality, having experienced those things first, is actually going to have a more difficult time getting back to the root to then grow forward from there. But it's not impossible. And that's one thing I will probably try and finish this rant on. It is not impossible. We get so many people who do come to us, and their initial understanding of the Morrigan, for example, is askew, or their initial understanding of the Dagda is off, or they're like, oh well, I just this is the only way I had actually heard of Cuchulainn. And then through giving themselves the time, investing in themselves, investing in their kind of belief in their spiritual path by taking the classes or, you know, following the free videos and stuff, whatever, they can and do make those changes. And we're very, very grateful, very honored and humbled to be able to be here to provide information and service to help that happen for people. Because for some people, it is life-changing. Finding the path of Irish paganism that we kind of try and present and try and encourage people to get onto and try and figure out for themselves can be life-changing for a lot of people. And that's why we do it. That's what it's all about at the end of the day. So yeah, again, thank you very much, Envion. I'm really, really grateful for your question. And again, gratitude to you for having done the work to be able to recognize the differences, to be able to recognize, and again, feeling that frustration. It's something I sympathize and empathize with, absolutely. You know, we are unique cultures. We are different to the Welsh and the Scottish, all of which deserve their own like unique kind of spacing and kind of clear guidance and clear kind of recognition and respect for themselves. But we don't get to doing that if we don't have people like yourself starting with the awareness and moving forward from that awareness piece. So again, gratitude to you for doing that. Long rant. I hope that's answered your question. But again, thank you very, very much. It's been a great one for me to dig into. And again, from all of us here at the Irish Pagan School, Gurav Mila Mahaka, thank you very, very much. Look after yourself and take care. Until next time, Slán. Goodbye.